Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today for our Global Health Seminar series. While we have more people continue to join the room, I just wanted to thank everybody for taking time off on the Friday to come and join us on our third and final seminar session, hosting around the theme of AI and big data in global health and healthcare in general. It's also our final seminar session for the year 2023, and thank you everybody for being a part of this session and any of the previous seminars this year. We will continue to host seminars and moving on from new topics as well as new speakers starting from February 2024 next year after Chinese New Year, and hope that you'll come and join us for that again. And if you missed any of our previous webinar sessions, you can find the recording on the SDGHI YouTube channel. We will also email all registrants the recording of today's webinar once it's available as well. So my name is Dr. Evelyn. I'm Associate Consultant at the National Cancer Centre Singapore and a faculty with the SDGHI Duke Global Health Institute. So just some housekeepings before we start. You should be able to see a question and answer box on the Zoom bar. Please let us know if you have any difficulties. Generally, please type your questions for each of the speakers today. And when we have time at the end of the session, we will answer as many questions as possible. So we're rounding off our session in the year with a two-part series today. Prof Sng Ban Leong as well as Dr. Jerry Cheng will introduce their topic for today on AI in their clinical practice. So I'll first introduce Professor Sng. He is the head and senior consultant at the Department of Women Anaesthesia at the KK's Women and Children Hospital, as well as the academic vice chair of research in Anaesthesiology and Perioperative Science academic clinical program. He is also associate professor at Duke-NUS Medical School and is the lead in KKH Center Grant for Medical Technology Core, as well as the lead in Artificial Intelligence Special Interest Group in KKH. He has obtained several national grants, including the NMRC Clinical Scientist Award, the National Health Innovation Center grants, as well as the MOH Health Innovation Fund. He has spearheaded several academic and industrial collaborations in research, clinical trials, and medical technology. So today he will kick off with his sharing entitled AI-powered ultrasound-guided automated spinal landmark identification system from idea to implementation. So without any further ado, Prof Sng, please take the stage. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Evelyn. Okay, so maybe can I just try to share my screen? Okay, I just want to check that you can see the screen as in full and you can hear me properly.
Yep, we can see and we can hear you perfectly.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, so thanks, Evelyn, for the introduction. My name is Ban Leong. I'm from KK Women's and Children's Hospital in the Department of Women's Anaesthesia. So I would like to first thank SDGHI for the invitation for this series, and said my title today is basically about the AI-powered ultrasound-guided automated spinal landmark identification system, and I'll be describing, from the idea, which we had a few years ago, and to the implementation issue in clinical practice. So there are several. I've of course gotten a few fundings. It is that I'm here. Things that to actually just to declare that things that I'm actually a medical advisor for this company called High Cura Medical Private Limited, because that's actually the use case that I'll be talking about. And I also like to acknowledge the contributions by the CEO of the company for some of the slide contents that will be used for this talk. Okay, so this is the outline of my talk. First, going through a case study, which is on this product called uSINE, and then I'll go into the clinical gap. How do we reframe the mind? How do we integrate a sort of like a technology AI solution? And then the use of teamwork, which is very important, trying to get a technology of AI sorts, things that into the market. And of course, in the sense of, going through the next few steps, and how do we implement technology AI in nature to the clinical practice. So the case study today basically is a uSINE. So basically it is an ultrasound-guided spinal landmark identification system. So it is actually a pre-procedural scan that basically is guided so that the clinician is able to know at which spinal landmark and actually at which precise needle point prior to actually inserting the spinal or an epidural needle. And this is done as a pre-procedural scan that will actually guide to ensure that we actually go into the correct space. So why is that important that we want to develop something like this? So the first is to define the clinical gap, because I think the unmet clinical need is very important, because spinal injections are actually very challenging. So things that requires a lot of precision, as the pathway of the needle insertion is actually very narrow. So we always want to go for this level called the L34, because that's the level that's optimal. So if you go too high, I think that there is actually a risk of hitting the spinal cord, especially the fact that if the spinal cord actually ends around L1, L2. If it's too low, especially for epidural analgesia, I think that it may become ineffective. And of course, if the approach of the angle becomes wrong, I think that then sometimes multiple punctures would actually be required, which may lead to more complications. So traditionally, things like that, and of course, I've been taught this way, which is a palpation-based technique. So basically, we feel the spine, things like this, it has a lot of reliance on interpretation of the doctors. And of course, we are blind to the target, which is actually the spinal space. And it is not effective for obese patients, because the spinal landmarks are very difficult to actually feel. So some studies actually have found that the first attempt success rate for obese patients is about 43%. However, more than 90% of clinicians actually use this technique routinely. So in the last probably 5 to 10 years, ultrasound-based technique is actually developed. And I think what is important is that there's actually a steep learning curve, because things that apparently this diagram here basically shows a bat's wing sort of like appearance. So things that you'll probably be wondering, where's the bat, right? So the thing about this is that you need basically hand-eye coordination when you do ultrasound. At the same time, things that you also need pattern recognition. So the other aspect is that the image quality degrades for obese patients. So even if in the best of hands, things that a first attempt success rate is about 77% in obese patients, used in a minority of clinicians using ultrasound frequently. So the next thing is that how do we reframe the mind and the question? So while we are actually trying to change clinical practice, what is important is that we want to know what is the workflow to put in, so that when the technology is being implemented, it is not a hindrance to our clinical practice. So in this case, we want to key in the patient's details, then we want to calibrate the ultrasound, then followed by that, you want to actually do the longitudinal view to locate the L34 level, and things like then followed by that, the transverse view to locate the midline and then the epidural space before you end the summary. So this is sort of the workflow that we want to go to. It's very important to have that in mind when you do technology, because things that there are two implications. One is that you want to have a good workflow, so that things that you will reduce the cost, lower the cost of adoption to the hospital, and also integrates a seamless care in our ultrasound scanning technique. So this is the slide that basically tells about the AI. So what happens is that if you look at the figure B, basically when you actually have scanned the back, right, means that the technology is able to tell you at which level, means that, for example, in this case, the L345 and L45 and L34. So what the technology does, my pointer is basically showing is that the AI is able to identify what is the tailbone or sacrum. And then what we do is we actually stitch the video together. That means when as the scan is being done, then we are able to stitch the program. I mean, the program is able to stitch the scan together, and thereby enabling things like the L34 to be identified. The next thing is that basically is about the integration. So I think it's important to know that there is actually a preclinical phase to this in terms of technology, and then a clinical phase to the technology. So what is important is that you must determine what is the data that is required and what you think would be able to lend you support for the next level of development. For example, in our case, most of the studies that are in preclinical stages, what we did was that we actually collected a lot of retrospective data. That means we actually do a lot of scans. And basically what we do is that that means we actually label each of the scan videos, so that basically using various techniques, we are able to then, for example, using cascading classifier, things like using various methods like support factor, machine, basically, or using these methods, we are able to actually do it retrospectively by saying that, okay, retrospectively, we're able to get the readings and also identifying the correct landmarks. So with this, the next thing is that we went into a clinical trial. So in clinical trial is important because things that you have actually wanted to put it in the clinical sense. And what's important is that the guiding system must be able to be done in real time. So what we have done is that we've done a preclinical phase, followed by a clinical phase. And in the clinical phase, you should always start with basically something which is simple. For example, in patients with a normal BMI, before then proceeding on to more difficult patients, for example, patients with obesity and increasing obesity. So in terms of the AI, I think there needs to be a thought-through process from the clinical to the preclinical to the clinical process, and then, of course, with building up difficulties of the clinical scenarios. So the other aspect is that when we actually wanted to do this automated guidance software, we were actually very cognizant of things that if we actually develop yet another ultrasound machine, that will become quite, a lot of, you actually need to buy new machines. So what we have done is that this AI was actually built on the automated software. So I think that on this case is on the right side. Basically, it is actually it actually runs, or the software actually runs off the shelf a laptop or a computer. And basically, the hospital does not need to purchase another separate ultrasound machine. And our model was actually to use a software licensing fee. So in terms of business model, it's something for us to consider. So I'm just going to show you basically the scan. So in this case, things that we are able to then, the software is able to identify what we call the sacrum, and then the L5 and L4. So following by that, as you scan upwards in a cathode manner, you're able to, the scan is able to show where the L34 is, as what is depicted here. And things that then you actually basically mark where the L34 is. So you turn the probe around for a transverse view. So the important thing is that we want to identify the midline. So when the midline is actually identified, it will become green color. And of course, for the purpose of the fact that we are doing an epidural, things or spinal, we are actually able to then know where the epidural space is, because there's a ligamentum flavum sort of a complex. And the scan is also able to auto-detect the epidural depth. So thereby, it is actually very useful in terms of basically trying to get the clinical sense of what we will normally have to do manually. The other aspect of the technology is actually making all the logistics work. So I've actually put here 4 aspects, which I think is important to consider. For example, let's say funding, whether it's from an academic funding or industry. So I think in that aspect for technology, the research collaborative agreement is very, very important between yourself and, of course, with the industry. The other portion is actually on how to do the clinical trials. I've actually listed some of the aspects that should be looked into. The third aspect is looking into intellectual property or IP protection, because I think it's important to ensure that there is actually technology disclosure, and also whether there's any potential for future licensing, especially the fact that from the academic point of view to the industry, because these are very important when you want to commercialize that product. The other aspect, though not so known, but I think it's very important as I went along this journey, is about risk management. So I think it's very important to analyze and actually do a pre-hazard assessment to identify possible risks and control measures. And I think for myself, I'm very, very fortunate. I'm in KK Hospital. There's actually a quality safety and risk management team that actually basically helps out with enterprise risk management, and basically helped me a lot actually in the clinical trials. So to identify some of these potential hazards or that may occur in a clinical trial. So what we have found clinically is things that are compared in literature, things that are, so for patients with actually a normal weight, that means BMI of less than 30, things that we have found that things that are compared to a literature of a rate of about 70% first attempt success rate, we were able to bring it up to about 92%. But even more important is the fact that in patients who are obese, and these are patients with BMI of more than 30, and a lot of them actually have BMI of more than 35, we're able to bring up the first attempt success rate from 43% to about 82% in our clinical trials. So that actually shows a clinical efficacy in the technology that we are developing. The other aspect basically is about teamwork. This is probably the most important thing that I've actually gotten in my experience, which is that you cannot do this alone. Okay, so one thing that I want to focus basically on the teamwork, especially how clinicians can actually work with industry. Well, I'll probably say that it's been a very insightful and learning experience. Things that, because we are actually talking about things that are not taught in medical school. Because we have to talk about when you actually want to bring in the sort of like the research sort of like equipment, you have to talk about DME commissioning requirements. What are the testing parameters that actually the company and yourself need to put through. And then very importantly, things that what is the purpose of doing that particular study? Is it for a pilot study? Are we meeting ISO standards? Are we aiming for HSA sort of like standards, CE mark, which is for European standards, or FDA US standards? Because all these different regulatory requirements are different. The other thing which I've also learned is that there's always going to be changes to the original plan, and it's to be expected. And sometimes it can be very difficult conversation, especially with the industry. And of course, what is important is that we have to review the agreements that are being put aside between two parties. Okay. And things like for the industry portion, I think it's very important to actually nail down these aspects, which include things like technical support, the issue of documentation, especially for regulatory requirements data, preventive maintenance and servicing of the equipment, especially during the clinical trials, and then later on with the clinical implementation. So I've actually said, like the things that there's actually a lot of communication that's actually needed between clinician and engineers, okay, in the company that Hycura, which is a startup company. So I think one aspect which I think we just want to highlight things that for AI is actually very, very challenging, because as you can see, we are actually annotating all these key points, doing where's the sacrum, which is the level, where's the midline, where's the epidural space. So basically what we are doing is this: we need a very close collaboration between clinicians and also with industry, especially the industry, the technical aspects of it, basically the engineers. So basically this collaboration is very important because things like one, we provide the clinical data from our patients. So during this process, we realized that there were about 300 videos because there were actually 300 patients. So it is obviously, we have to annotate all these 300 videos, which is obviously impossible for clinicians to do it, but we had to do it in somehow. So I think industry is very important because in this case, they were actually very good because they actually sort of like did up a program for supervised learning. So therefore, things that after a while, they were able to take over the process of annotation from the clinicians and then to be performed actually by the engineers. So of course, things that we actually do some random sort of like checks to ensure that these annotations are actually correct. But I think this is important, and basically this shows basically how between academia and industry, how we can collaborate in a very fruitful way. The other aspect is that since I think a lot of us things that are still not really in this aspect of regulatory development, but I've gone through this once, things that actually more than once, but for this project, I would like to say basically is that clinicians are actually a very integral part of basically regulatory development and regulatory clearance, because things that I think one aspect is that although a lot actually has to do with basically technical details, for example, the use of, let's say, a quality management system, put here at ISO 13485, the ability to actually come up with a technical file, basically having this, all the notification to the various parties, that kind of thing, right? But the clinician does actually bring a very important role in this regulatory clearance, okay? So I'll illustrate it by my next slide. Basically, it's our contribution. The black colored stuff basically is mainly done by the industry people, but there are some aspects which I think is very important in orange, which is done by the clinicians and only by the clinicians ourselves. Because things that we need to basically have the relevant sort of like usable data to be included. Because in the regulatory development, there's also about clinical evaluation. And we have to make comments about the device performance, the device safety, okay, especially for AI. And of course, the device comparability. For example, in this case, we have to compare with similar products that may actually be available in the commercial market, okay? The other aspect is that in the regulation, basically, you're also looking out for your clinical experience. So basically, the experience you have while doing the project and also the results of the clinical trial is actually very important and can only be gotten by the clinicians. So we do actually play a very important part in the regulatory clearance and development. So I just want to bring up, since I've just recently gone through this portion, it's about what are the aspects which are important for regulatory approvals. So our go-to-market things that in this case was actually to have Singapore being the first market for uSINE. And basically the startup company then prioritized HSA approval, basically for the Singapore, and then followed by CE approval, which is actually for the European market. So what is interesting is that uSINE itself thinks that actually took 4 months, this technology took 4 months to actually clear HSA approval. But it took about 12 months actually for the CE approval. And I think because this is SDGHI, so I thought maybe I'll just bring up some of the important points, when you want to go out of Singapore, what are the challenges? So in this case, the main reasons for why things that there's actually a lengthy approval was due to several reasons. One is because things that in the CE mark, there's more requirements for requirements and requests for more details on technical documentation, some details about cybersecurity, and of course things that about the clinical data, because they want the clinical data in a certain way. So these aspects actually sort of like delayed the CE mark. But at the same time, there were also some fundamental changes within CE. Because things that the notified bodies were actually in transition. Because apparently things that there was this MDD, there was actually going to be transition to this something called MDR. So basically, what happens is that the CE marks under this MDD scheme was going to expire. So basically, a lot of these devices actually had to be transitioned to these new standards called the MDR. So things that because of these transitions, things that there is actually some delay. So long and short, what's the moral of the story is that basically you may think that you can actually get it quite fast, but actually more time is actually needed, and you should plan for more time for go-to-market, and things that be willing to provide as much details as possible. That's why I think that sometimes the clinicians may need to provide more information or may then dig into the results for even more details than what you think you need in the first place. The other aspect is about the CE sort of like audit, because there's actually a need for basically a review of this technical dossier. So basically there's, especially for AI, there will be a lot of questions in terms of software architecture, how the AI actually works, what's the algorithm type, the data management, how it's being done. And of course, things that because it also comes together with some software in a way how it runs, things that so there's also need for testing and updates of the off-the-shelf and what they call SOAP, basically software of unknown provenance. For example, the use of open source software components will actually need to be reviewed in the technical dossier. The other aspect which is important is actually cybersecurity. So that aspect for AI basically, or for any device, basically needs a verification so that the implementation can be effective. And actually a need for a penetration test is actually needed. So for us, thankfully for uSINE, it is actually on-premise and offline, but devices actually need to be on the cloud. Of course, the cybersecurity requirements will be more stringent. The other aspect is especially about risk analysis. Of course, a thorough risk assessment, identification, and risk-benefit analysis is required. And things that I am very, very grateful basically for this very thorough risk assessment, which is started and then became a bit easier as we went along. And one aspect basically I was being asked is about the engagement of Asian countries. How do we do it, in this case? So we realized is that the use of conferences and trade shows were actually important as a means to assess the technology's marketability in the country. Basically, means that during a conference booth, basically invite potential distributors and users to your booth and to evaluate similar technologies within the exhibition area. The other aspect is actually to use the distributors' network to have direct access to hospitals. So within the Asian context, basically, it is good to have direct feedback from the doctors in the different countries, because different populations will have different needs. For example, seniors more in perhaps needs in Japan, obesity we found actually in Malaysia and Middle East. And there's also a difference between the needs of a public hospital versus that of a private hospital, okay? Because cost and the use of technology is slightly different between these two, especially in Asian countries. And therefore, I think that the important lesson is that there are different value propositions for each country. So the other aspect is actually bridging the gap between industry and academia. So I've listed out 4 things. Basically, it's about the conflicting goals between academia and commercialization. Things that these would have to be sorted out. Things that for us in academia, we always want to publish. But however, things that if you publish, then things that there will be difficulty in protection of the intellectual property. Of course, the other aspect is about time commitment. So of course, we are busy clinicians, but so things that we tend to be, I suppose, slightly slower. Things that when we reply, because of our clinical commitment, things that, but of course, the companies are basically businesses, so they want results as soon as possible. So what's important is to actually set common goals and expectations and to optimize the expertise and learning from one another, because obviously this collaboration will work only if there's actually a synergism within ourselves. I would like to also just say that the R&D journey basically is actually really multifold. So you shouldn't be thinking that, in this case, this AI technology can be gotten in one go. So basically, it basically stands from all the way from institutional grants all the way until national level grants, and actually it's over a few years. So we started in 2015, and we are still developing as of today. The next steps basically will be talking about adoption. So what we have done actually is that on top of the AI software, we also developed hardware to come with it, and we were very fortunate to actually get AMII funding for fabrication of and tooling of this final prototype for consumable. At the same time, means that we were able to sort of like with the HSA approval, bring KKH basically to be a clinical practice early adopter. And we're also very fortunate because currently we're actually shortlisted for I2A funding. So currently we're writing the proposal for this sort of like technology to be adopted across clusters in Singapore. So hopefully things that we will submit this very, very soon. The other aspect is that about collaboration. So not only just with anesthesia departments within Singapore, but we also want to collaborate within things that are not just for anesthesia. We also are collaborating with, for example, neurology, and also collaborating internationally in Australia and also in Ireland. So 2013 is very significant for uSINE, because things that we have actually managed to implement this clinically in KKH. So we actually rolled out in May 2023 in the operating theatres in KKH. So what is important during our implementation, I realized, is that we have to work with industry to resolve governance and cybersecurity concerns. And we have to plan basically education and training for faculty and also residents. So I think as a PI, I realized is that we really have to be receptive to feedback and criticisms, because I think only by accepting and being receptive means that we can make the project better. So I just want to end here to say that things that I've actually gone through a few things. For example, let's say clinical gap, reframing the mind, integrating the solution, and then teamwork. So of course, that is basically grit, right? Things like that. So basically, you need to have resilience, and basically in grit, there's actually two components that stick with it, which is that you need to have the passion, but at the same time, you need to have the persistence to ensure that the technology solutions for the AI, for example, actually will be, advancing as you go along. So this is my very, very last slide. This gentleman here basically is Bill McDermott. So he's actually currently is CEO of ServiceNow and ex-CEO of SAP. So during one of the CNN sort of like interviews, he actually made a statement about what he believes in the way that he does things. And I think it's relevant for innovation and AI today. So one, he basically talked about staying hungry. I think it's important, means that we also always want to stay hungry to make sure that we actually give a better solution than what we can think of. The next thing is that stay humble. Be very, very wary, and be very humble, things that to look into various solutions and listen to your team, both from the clinicians and also from the industry, to ensure that the best solution then comes out. And of course, for me, it's very important is that in your innovation journey, you have to stay happy, because at the end of the day, things that we all want to improve patient lives. And I think this is just merely one aspect for clinicians to actually, see how we can better improve patient care. So with this, I thank you, and I'll be happy if anybody wants to email me on any contents of this talk. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Prof. But now I'd like to introduce our second speaker, Prof. Jerry Chen. Dr. Jerry is a fellowship-trained consultant orthopedic surgeon at Singapore General Hospital with a clinical interest in hip and knee condition, enhanced recovery after surgery, as well as robotic surgery and joint replacement surgery. He is also actively involved in research and education, having published over 100 scientific journals and book chapters. Today, he's going to be sharing with us about his work in automated osteoporotic score prediction using artificial intelligence. So, Prof. Jerry, over to you. And at the end of it, we will do a final panel discussion as well as a Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Evelyn. Okay, so I think my AI project with my team is not as advanced as uSINE, but we share what we have. Yeah, so briefly, what we are doing, of course, is to look at our as the title suggests, osteoporosis, to want to find something that can substitute the DEXA score. Why is it relevant? Because as we go into an aging population, we have more and more people in the population who has osteoporosis. This can be age-related, or it can be post-menopausal or hormone-related driven kind of osteoporosis. So 1 in 2 women and 1 in 5 men above the age of 50 will have the risk of osteoporosis-related fracture in their lifetime. Osteoporosis-related fracture includes the hip fracture, spine compression fracture, distal radius fracture, so on and so forth. We call fragility fracture. And usually for hip fracture, it's quite significant because the 1-year mortality risk after a hip fracture is 19%. Despite the best surgical care, best geriatrician care, our 1-year mortality rate in our country is 19%, worldwide is 30%. So of course, we want to prevent fragility fracture, and we have to start off by first diagnosing osteoporosis and treating it. So although the gold standard to diagnose osteoporosis is using the DEXA, bone mineral density scan, but of course, it's not always routinely ordered in our clinical practice until the patient has, for example, a fragility fracture or has been diagnosed or high risk for osteoporosis, then we order it. Of course, we are a developed country in Singapore. In the developing country, the availability for this DEXA machine is even more challenging. Is for every per million population in Asia Pacific. For developed country, they have about 12 to 14 machine, i.e. like Singapore. And in developing countries or city, there's less than 1 per million population. So what we hope to do is to use our hip, our routine hip X-ray, that usually any patients with any hip-related condition who sees an orthopedic surgeon will have one done. And hopefully from there, we can screen for osteoporosis. Yep. So how do we do that? Is we do a course like a lead review and see what are the predictors on a hip AP X-ray that can actually help us with predict for osteoporosis. So we have things like DOS classification. You know, we also have this CTI, which in the literature at the moment has the strongest evidence to try to correlate with osteoporosis. So how we do is, of course, we will measure. You can see as the diagram suggests itself. We get from 10 cm below the lesser trochanter, we will measure the outer diameter of the bone and the inner diameter of the bone. And the difference between the two diameter over the outer diameter is our CTI, which we call the cortical thickness index. And we try to include other parameters, including gender, height, weight, age, race as well, and to try and improve our algorithm. Our goal, of course, is to use this AP pelvis that is routinely done by the orthopedic surgeons as a routine investigation for patients with hip pathology or hip pain, as a mass screening tool, potentially also in the primary healthcare settings such as polyclinic, so that we can pick up patients at risk for osteoporosis and screen them, or rather do a formal DEXA scan and treat them appropriately. And hopefully with our improved algorithm over time, it may be an alternative to the gold standard, which is the DEXA scan. So this is how our AI works. Essentially, we use mass RCNN, which is one of the options for actually such AI using images. First, we of course segment the both femur, and we will see whether there's any implant present. If there's implant present on one side, we have to measure the CTI on the other side, the contralateral side where there's no implant. So you can see the X-rays, some of the X-rays actually have implants, which we cannot use to measure our CTI. And after the auto calculation of the CTI, we generate our AI model, and we include parameters like gender, height, weight, and age. And then it will give us a score of whether the patient is at risk for osteoporosis or not. Yeah, so other things that we have tried is to include race, being a multi-racial society. Watts Triangle, which one of the US institute, a very big US hospital, presented their data at a conference and showed very good results. Unfortunately for us, it does not show the similar results in our population. DOS classification, trabecular pattern as well. Yeah, so These are the things that we try to include in our algorithm, but have not quite worked out. So we remove this parameter. We are considering things like smoking history, alcohol use, previous family history or personal history of fragility fracture as well into our algorithm to improve our AI model. So again, as it explains itself, the picture, how we segment the femur, you can see, and then the site that we use, we will auto detect any implant. If there's implant, we will not use the site that has a metallic implant in the femur, and we use the contralateral site. So this is just one example or video of very simply what we have done up so far. So we can upload an image, for example. Yep. Okay, so moving on, just sharing a bit of our results. You can see so far we have not included smoking history, alcohol history, personal or family history of fragility fracture, for example. We have the best model results with the AP pelvis X-ray with CTI, rather than DOS classification or rather than Watts triangle. Which all these are all measured on the AP X-ray, of course, and we included height, weight as well as age. So you can see we have the lowest mean absolute error for using this combination. And of course, if we look at our fresh data, we analyze another 497 X-rays. Of course, we are still relatively small in sample size, not in the thousands or tens of thousands yet, which will hopefully help improve our accuracy. But so far, you can see our precision is about 87%. I to say of all the total AI test positive, that means using our CTI and our algorithm, then the prediction tells us that patient is osteoporotic, and then we test it against bone mineral density DEXA scan, and the patient is diagnosed as osteoporosis. Our accuracy, our precision is 87%, and our recall is 86.3%, which is not too bad. Quite optimistic about it. So of course, 86.3% is of all the real positive cases. That means patients with osteoporosis in this 497 X-rays of patients, 86.7 we are picked up by our AI as positive as well. So lower right hand corner, you can see the distribution. We still have some false negative and some false positive, and I believe that we fine tune with more X-rays and fine tune my algorithm with histories of like previous fragility fracture. So kind of like moving towards the FRET score instead of just using a single T-score using the BMD, or rather using DEXA scan T-score to diagnose osteoporosis. We have things like FRET score, which shows up the 10-year risk of having a fragility fracture. So we are hoping to move towards FRET score, where we can be more accurate and more sensitive. This is our timeline. So you can see we started in November 2019. We started with 100 images of AP pelvis X-ray. Of course, we wrote out an IRB. We de-anonymized the X-ray, and then we sent to our collaborator, which is Nanyang Polytechnic, who helped us with the AI model. Then, of course, the results were relatively positive. So we went on, you can see, from between June 2021 to June 2023. It's a good 2 years, actually. During COVID, of course, we sent almost 500 patients with a BMD scan and AP pelvis within 1 year apart. Okay, we tried 500, but I think 3 have to be eliminated. So we have 400, still almost 500. And we send to NYP to try and improve our algorithm and to test model development to get a better accuracy for our model. We tried even things like Watts triangle, as well as the DOS classification. But unfortunately, I think for Watts triangle, although it's very good in the American population, we could not reproduce the same result using our local population. And I think our endpoint where we are now is that we want to have to clinically validate our results, like in-house validation. What we hope to see is that whether it can be our model now can be used at least as a screening tool for patients who have routine AP pelvis X-ray done in polyclinic or specialist outpatient clinic. And if they are picked up, we can send this patient for screening with the gold standard, which is DEXA scan. And if they are diagnosed as osteoporosis, we can actually treat them early and hence thereby over time reduce our incidence of fragility fracture, which of course have, for example, hip fracture, fragility fracture has a very high 1-year mortality rate despite best clinical care. And so where we are now, you can see we hope to, during our in-house validation in our hospital, anyone who has a patient who have completed both X-ray of the AP pelvis as well as the bone mineral density DEXA scan, likely due to hip fracture, we will use it add on to validate our model and to improve our model. And patients, for example, with hip osteoarthritis with no hip fracture, and scheduled for X-ray, we also use it to see the X-ray, their AP pelvis X-ray, will be input into our model and we give them a prediction score whether they have osteoporosis now before their hip surgery, their hip replacement surgery. Yep. So this is our potential deployment method. Of course, we are still very early on in our AI development, but that's what we envision, that our X-ray are done and then it will be sent automatically to our AI model, which will be fed back. And then after that, there'll be a score, like kind of given to the radiologist, and they can decide if they want to input it into the final X-ray, kind of like how we do trauma care now for our pre-surgery templating. And then the clinician on the front, the primary care physician in the polyclinic, or the orthopedic doctor or any relevant specialty that's seeing the patient can actually use the X-ray and see the results and decide if they want to send the patient for further diagnosis of osteoporosis and thereafter treatment. So it's very simple. Our AI, we are in the early stage, but we have to thank our team members who have worked very hard. Of course, we need a very good radiologist partner to help. So we have Dr. Tan. We have a very good AI team at Nanyang Poly as well. Under Dr. Tu. And then of course, I have to thank the Department of Future Health, SGH, especially the AIA team, like Wai Chin, who have been helping us all this while since we started this in 2019. And we actually did secure 165K MOE grant together with NYP, Nanyang Poly. So of course, I have to thank an MOE for the funding support as well. And with that, that's all I have. Thank you for your attention.
Hey, thanks so much, Jerry, for coming to this talk. I think now's a great time because we've ended with a good enough 15 minutes of question and answer. And I kind of want to make the whole discussion and the whole panel discussion as free, as easy as possible and as open as possible. I think we do have a lot of questions coming in, and I think that's great because we have 2 projects that shows the entire process itself from the early initiation all the way to the implementation. And so we can have as many questions as related to this whole process of innovation and implementation in the clinical practice. Maybe I'll just start the ball rolling and I'll just go down the questions. I think a lot of people are asking about the clinical trial and how long is the process really? Because Prof Sng, I think, it sounds as if you've gone through a whole mammoth task and literally climbed the whole Everest itself. I mean, just for understanding, how long is this whole process from the whole implementation to the whole, coming out of the idea as well as clinical trials itself?
Okay, so maybe I'll just give a generic thing. I think the first thing to do is that be very realistic about how the clinical trial needs to be done. Okay, so basically don't promise to do something that you cannot deliver. Okay, so I think that's very important, especially for funding agencies. So what I'll probably say is that as a general guide, basically is that I think you have to fit into whatever that the funding agency is willing to give to you for the clinical trial. So be very aware of what is your recruitment like, what sort of patients will agree to, and make sure that you can actually do it before you actually want to do the clinical trial. So that's the first thing I'll probably say. But I think for us, things that I think in KK we're very, very fortunate. Things that I think spinal anesthesia is very commonly administered for cesarean delivery. And of course, for us, things that pregnant women are very, very used to having ultrasound. So things that, so in a way, it gives us a lot of opportunity to explain to patients because it's a technology they are very used to and it's a procedure that's very commonly performed. So I think these are the aspects you need to go into. Basically, you must know your patients who will actually be interested to join the trial. And of course, things that for the funding agency, what's important is that you must be able to make sure you meet the target for the clinical trial. Yeah.
And I mean, Jerry, you're in the middle of it right now. how long has this process been for you, and you know, what keeps it going? Like, I mean, I can imagine it's a few years, few months. Where do you think in terms of the timeline it's predicted to go?
Yep. I thank you for the question. I think we are very early on versus uSINE. So it's very good to see when Prof Sng share his experience where we can actually learn from him, and we can move this at least our project forward as well. I think the thing that is important is, of course, must have passion and perseverance. Yeah. So the problem with us is that we need more X-rays. So of course, at least in SGH, we have about 500 plus hip fracture a year, and then add another couple of hundreds of total hip replacement. We only have about 1,000 a year of AP pelvis. So apart from just drawing from past X-ray done, and we want to do forward prospective validation, we may have to even include other centers as collaborators and work together, so we can go into tens of thousands. And I think that's probably the way forward. Of course, funding is also something important. That I like what Prof Sng has said. I think we need to plan ahead. Yeah, because this is to actually commercialize AI a product eventually, and put it into use. It's definitely a many years of effort and hard work, and definitely takes a lot of passion and perseverance.
I think you touched on a very important point, which is what is the threshold for accuracy, right? For any AI mechanism or any AI intervention. I think someone had also asked the same question, and using uSINE as a case in point. What is the accuracy of that AI model, and what exactly is that target accuracy that we're all looking for? I mean, on the ground, we know 100% is impossible. Is it 90? Is it 91? Like, where is that threshold? And because you're the first and the pioneer in such a field, I'm sure there's not much data that we can use to consider what is that threshold. So how do we actually refine that model and refine that threshold itself?
Okay, so that's a difficult question. Okay, so I would first say that actually when we wrote the grants, actually we were actually looking for a clinical outcome. That means we were actually looking in first attempt success rate. That means you must get it in the spinal the first time round. So that was actually more of the outcome that we were looking into. But of course, things that in terms of accuracy, I'm just saying one is actually from the grant point of view, things that you have to look for the clinical outcome. But in terms of the AI model, things that there are several things that are important. I think it depends on a few things. One basically is that is the type of population and that you are looking into. Because things that, for example, if there's a shift in the kind of population, for example, from the uSINE point of view, while we shifted from, for example, let's say a patient who is actually of a normal BMI to patients who actually were, in higher BMI, there were several things that we faced. One was that one scan depth was different. Okay, so that gave us some issues in terms of basically trying to modify the AI. So we needed to come up with what we call obese model, because there were actually obviously more subcutaneous fat, that kind of thing. The depth is different. The image degradation were actually different. So what I'll probably say is that you will probably need to determine the accuracy of the AI model. For us, we were very fortunate. I think most of the correlations basically were about more than 90% for uSINE, and we were quite comfortable with that. But we didn't really start off by saying that we want to target that AI model to have a certain thing. But I think it's important to have that at the back of our mind, because most funding agencies are not looking out for that. They're looking out for what is your clinical outcome that you're trying to get at. I think that's very important from a different perspective. And then I think the other question about mechanism to refine the model, if there's actually model drift eventually. So that's also the other aspect, which is that we start off with one sort of like what we hope to be a homogeneous population. Obviously, you know that in clinical practice, it cannot be. Going to say, obviously, you have to be, throughout, so as you build, you have to be aware. When we started with normal BMI, we thought, okay, that's fine. We went to higher BMI, they realized, actually, there's some issues. So we had to address at that point of time, stop the trial, find out what's the problem, things like, why is this AI not performing so well? Things like, so therefore, a pulse on the ground, is very important in the development of these models. Yeah, thank you.
Jerry, do you have anything to add on to that? I mean, you're doing it right now, literally.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. So, I think just from our own experience, we always hope for the best, right? The literature you did read in the medical literature to say, okay, so we're thinking maybe our CTI AI can be like 95%, but obviously it's not 95%, it's 87%. So then the question is, where do we take it from? Just from my own point of view is that we can try to include more factors to refine the model so we can get better and better. Not just in numbers, but also like factors like such as things we have not included, like smoking history, alcohol history, that we can, so hopefully our model get better. Then the other thing is, if it does not eventually hit a gold standard, say for example 95% that we targeted, then where is the role of our AI? Do we like completely think it's no role in the market or no role in our clinical practice? Or is there a screening, for example, a screening role? Because to be fair, 80, 87, 90 plus, probably quite high also in accuracy. And if we can pick up those patients who have osteoporosis but have never been diagnosed, I think there will be some cost saving relevance in the healthcare as well. For example, very simply, number one is early diagnosis, lower the incidence of hip fracture despite our increasingly aging population, and hence the healthcare costs required to treat aging, fragility, hip fracture, for example. Number two, in patients undergoing other hip surgery, if a proud known diagnosis of osteoporosis, our technique of, for example, doing a hip replacement will be different. We can cement in the femur implant rather than not using an uncemented. So I think there are other ways where the AI model can contribute, even if we do not eventually hit our target of, say, 95% accuracy. But of course, along the way, we want to make it as best as possible. And again, I do agree with Prof Sng. I don't think there's any. I mean, if we were to match at least for us to DEXA scan, then 100% is the gold standard. But as with many things, it's not always 100%.
Yeah, and I just wonder, like you get a model that's good as 85% and 90%. Perhaps that 1 to 2% subsequently after that to improve your model comes at a very much higher cost and a lot more effort to put into it. And the question is whether or not that 1 to 2% really does make that very, very much of a difference. But of course, in clinical practice, the ideal number would always be 100% and comparing it to the gold standard. And I don't know, I think that's a question that I don't think any of us can answer at this point in time, because it really depends on the individual project. I also want to take on this question before I'm mindful of time. We still have a bit of time, 10 minutes. So anybody on the call, if there's anything else you want to type in, please go ahead. But I want to touch on the big, elephant in the room, which is the IP. And I think all of us come in from different aspects, different angles, and we have a lot of people of different backgrounds in this talk. But let's just come from the place of a clinical physician and coming from a public institution. Where exactly is that negotiation with industry? Bear in mind that this will go on YouTube, so let's be careful about what we say. But essentially, how do we negotiate with industry partners? Where exactly is the proportion of the IPs, and what are the pitfalls? I think there are a lot of people probably working on individual projects in this chat, and they're probably interested to know about that as well.
Okay, so maybe I will answer the question first. So I think what I'll probably say is that when you come up with something which is innovative, please always consider the intellectual property aspects of it right at the start. Okay, so I think that's something which I appreciated, and I think actually SHIP, Sing Health Intellectual Property, office is actually really very, very helpful. And I was very glad that actually I approached them really very early on in my project. So that was really at the start. So in a way, things that how uSINE sort of like started was actually a collaboration actually between KKH and also the National University Hospital. National University of Singapore. So basically a university and with KKH. So basically, and it's with actually the Department of Engineering. So basically, so the IP was actually shared in that way. So that was in a way, because I think both parties were academia. So I think that sort of like made it easier. So when we developed the whole thing, and eventually we sort of like spun a startup company. So I think what happens is that things that then became sort of like the licensing portion. So I think that's actually, I realized is that we thankfully had the IP sort of like, put down really very early. Because I think what's important is that that led to easier negotiation in terms of licensing with the industry partner later on. I think we don't really know, which pathway we will go. But I think I've gone through several of these, with various success and failures. Okay, what I'll probably just only say is that I think if you have an innovative idea, means that please go through with SHIP to make sure that you have secured your IP, because I think that is really something which you may not realize is important at the start. But I was glad that I did it for and of course with NUS we were quite certain things that we actually did the correct thing. Now that retrospectively speaking, looking back, it was a good decision. Thanks.
Jerry, do you have anything to add on to that?
I think Prof Sng covered quite well holistically about IP. We also decided from onset with our partner institution, and it's easy because for our own experience, we actually have a private company which wanted to join the two institution. So in the end, we have to discuss between ourselves and NYP, whether it's how much value add can the company bring to us, and I think it's a joint decision, and how we're going to further split the IP after that. And after some consideration, we actually did not have the company coming on board, but it's always good to be very clear at the start. Yeah.
So I mean, I'm just gonna bite the bullet and say it out. I think generally all of us should have, as an institution, have some IP with regards to whatever model that we create. So I think regardless of Prof Sng or Prof Jerry's solution, the institution, or at least KK as well as SGH, does have some sort of IP ownership with regards to that particular device. I think it's also important to say that, there are some pitfalls that we need to watch out for, like what Jerry had said, that sometimes if the partnership doesn't work or if the IP doesn't go across, sometimes it's better to call it quit at the upfront and to be clear about it. I think also, just so that other people are aware of, especially those who are interested to start their own, perhaps you guys can share a little bit about the whole, research contract or the RCAs or the project agreements that you guys went through. Just a brief idea, because just in case anybody else on the call is actually interested in starting their own, perhaps is there something that they could do as well for that? And John, I see your question. I'll come to that in a while.
Okay, maybe I'll just say that I think the research collaborative agreement, I think I think all the individual institutions do have their research office. Things that, of course, I work with the KK Research Center, so they'll be able to guide you very clearly on basically how the RCA should be actually crafted. I mean, things that I think it was quite seamless for myself, because I think there's actually generally a first portion which is quite general, sort of like some agreements sort of thing, general sort of like start, and then followed by basically a more project specific thing. I think what I think, and I implore everybody to do, is that look at the outcomes and the deliverable very clearly, what you're supposed to deliver and what the other party is supposed to deliver. Okay, because I think that's one of the aspects that you don't want this to be contentious when you come to that particular deliverable, especially when there are financial implications that come with it, or if there are IP implications that come with that particular deliverable. So I think when we are trying to review all these sort of like RCAs between institutions or with the industry, just make sure that you're very clear on what you're supposed to deliver and what the other party is supposed to deliver. And things that I think, and always go back and fall back on that. Things that whenever things that you want to make sure that the project is going well. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, I think that we have very good support team, both in KKH as well as in SGH. So for SGH side, we have actually the AIA team that actually helped me a lot with this our RCA that we draft with NYP, and in the RCA, there are milestones to achieve. When do we achieve the milestone? By how we share the IP, who is going to be the leading institution. Everything is very well written. Yeah, so I would say that for my view is that if any of you who's just starting out and want to try it, I think always seek some advice from people who have done it, as well as seek your help, advice from your institution who have in the relevant department. For in SGH case, AIA, where they have experience in doing it, and then the journey will probably be a bit smoother and better.
I'm just going to go straight to the last question, and I'm going to answer it up front because one of the participants, John, actually asked whether or not it's important for Singapore-based innovation to plan for international collaboration. Up front, to me, the answer is straightforward, yes, because we need the collaboration and we need the data. So I will rephrase this question because I think it's a yes and no, and in my opinion, it's a very big yes, but. Prof Sng and I think Jerry has also mentioned that they are, in fact, Prof has already started that collaboration and validation with other people of other countries to get the data to validate the particular product. And I think Jerry was talking about wanting to reach regional collaborators as well. Perhaps you could share a little bit, and after all, we are looking towards a global health institute and the global collaboration, how that journey has been and whether or not, you would encourage people to do it, open up to more international collaborations and so on and so forth. Yeah, Prof Sng, perhaps you could take the floor first.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So I think, okay, so answer is very clear. I think that you definitely need to expand because Singapore is too small already. But as I've actually mentioned before, I think that basically each of the various markets, right, actually are different. Things that as I went along, because whatever that I put there is are basically what I've prepared for the experience for this talk. Because I realized is that I think each person may have a different experience. So I think what's important is that basically what the company, I mean, if you're working with industry partner, I think that be very clear on what is the business model, what markets do they actually want to go into, the kind of thing, and see whether that as a clinician, do you think it really makes sense, the kind of thing. I think that's important. And things that each place is very, very different. For example, let's say if it's European markets or US, they are very, very mature. They require a lot of documentation, for example. Things that of course, for the Asian side, things that is near to Singapore, but they pose different challenges, as I've actually mentioned earlier in my talk. So basically, be very clear on the considerations you have. Things that, especially the fact that about how you will commercialize, what's the pricing, the costing, the kind of thing, right? So and who is going to pay, the hospital, the patient, the kind of thing. So all these things would need to be sorted out. Whichever technology or even AI. So things that some of these considerations would need to be put in. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. So again, I do agree that we have to look in the foreign market, international market, even for say our osteoporosis project. Because in developing market, for example, there's actually not many DEXA scan. So this is where we have a big role to play as well, because we can do simple X-ray like pelvis X-ray and diagnose osteoporosis. I think because we just started our AI, so if we are small, we tend to attract smaller players, even in the industry, right? So they may not have a good international market that they can capture yet. So for at least at SGH, we have this 3C AI roundtable. So if anyone that's joining us today that is interested, we can present your AI idea to our 3Cs, i.e. usually it'll be CFO, COO, CMB, and sometimes CEO of the hospital, and people who have good experience like Daniel Ting. He also sits in, and they give us good advice. And sometimes when there's chance for collaboration or there's some visitor from overseas that's doing something related to your AI project, they can actually link you up and hopefully can help you achieve this international collaboration earlier, even though you're in the early stage of your AI project.
I think that's great. And I mean, coming from the ground, I imagine what's also important is even after you detect all these abnormalities and so on and so forth, you need collaborative partners from the other nations, especially in the hospitals, because once you screen, you detect what's going to happen. Are there going to be any follow-up within the institutions or within whatever nations that you partner with as collaborative partners? And I think having that health system come together is actually very important in terms of the Global Health Institute and what exactly you want to do in terms of partnership. Okay, so I'm mindful of time. It is 2:05. We have completed the 1 hour session. It's a fireside chat for everybody, and I thank you everybody for your patience. As we end this year's conferences and end this year's seminar series, I think Glenn has already shared the link with regards to some of the feedback. Do let us know what kind of things you're interested in knowing so that we can plan better talks in the future, and especially as we start to plan our 2024 seminar series for Global Health Institute. Once again, thank you very much, Prof Sng. Thank you very much, Dr. Jerry, for coming down today to really just talk to all the people who are interested in coming out with their own AI projects, as well as working with the regional partners. Once again, thank you very much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed today. I thoroughly enjoyed it, I have to say. So thank you very much, and have a good Friday. Thank you, everybody.